Michael had always been a man of reason. Raised in a small town in Texas, he had a solid life. His work as a mechanic was stable, and his family was everything to him. He married Emily, a woman whose love for him was matched only by her devotion to her faith. Michael, however, couldn't see the need for religion in his life. To him, the world worked on logic and science, and he couldn't imagine any other truth. Emily, on the other hand, had prayed for years that Michael would open his heart to the teachings she held dear. But despite her efforts, he remained distant from her church, uninterested in her belief in a higher power. It wasn't until a fateful night, while working late at the shop, that Michael's worldview would shatter, when an accident sent him into the very jaws of death. As Michael's story unfolds, you'll witness a journey from disbelief to a kind of faith that changed his life forever. But before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and comment below with where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Hi, I'm Michael, and this is my story. I used to think that death was just the end, a final chapter with no afterlife. I'd always joked about it, mocked the idea of angels, devils, and everything in between. Religion was for the weak, those who couldn't handle the harshness of reality. I didn't need God. I had a good job, a beautiful wife, and everything I thought I wanted. But that night, everything changed. It started like any other evening. I was in the garage, working on a car that had been giving me trouble all day. I remember feeling the exhaustion creeping in, the weight of the tools in my hand, the quiet hum of the shop in the background. Then, suddenly, a sharp pain in my chest, a cold sweat. I couldn't breathe, and my vision started to blur. Before I knew it, I collapsed on the concrete floor. The next thing I remember was the feeling of weightlessness. I was no longer in the shop. I was falling, fast. But it wasn't like any fall I'd ever experienced before. I was suspended in darkness, surrounded by the faintest, most unsettling whispers. I felt it before I saw it. The heat, the oppressive air, and then I saw him, the devil. He stood in front of me, cloaked in shadow, eyes glowing with malevolent fire. He spoke without words, yet I heard him clear as day. You thought you knew the truth, didn't you? This is where you were always headed. I didn't understand. I fought it, screamed, but there was no escape. When I first opened my eyes again, I was lying on the floor of the garage, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. I didn't know what had happened. My chest still ached, and my heart raced like I had run a marathon. But it was the feeling that lingered, the heaviness in the air, the fear that clung to me like a second skin. That moment, that place, it felt so real. It was as if I had crossed over to the other side. I sat there trying to make sense of it. Was it just a hallucination, a result of my panic attack? But the words the devil spoke, those words rang in my ears long after I came to. This is where you were always headed. What did that mean? Was he right? Was I really destined for that place? It didn't make sense. It couldn't. I was a man of reason. I had to have an explanation. So I chalked it up to a bad dream, my body's response to the physical shock I had just endured. But something in me told me it wasn't that simple. The feeling of dread, of absolute certainty that I had stood face to face with something dark, something real, it wouldn't go away. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions of life, work, home, the usual routine. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I avoided Emily's questions about what had happened. She had found me lying there unconscious when she came to check on me, but I didn't want to talk about it. It was too much. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't admit that something had happened that I couldn't explain. But the nightmares started, dark, suffocating, full of whispers and shadows. And in those dreams I saw the devil again, standing in front of me, repeating those same words, "This is where you were always headed." Only this time there was something more. I saw flashes of my life, decisions I had made, people I had hurt, moments of selfishness and pride. I saw how cold I had been, how closed off from the love Emily had given me, from any real belief in anything beyond myself. I started to question everything. My worldview had been shattered, and the pieces weren't fitting back together the way they used to. I tried to talk to Thomas about it, hoping for some logical explanation, but he just brushed it off. "It was just a bad episode, Mike. You're overthinking it." But I wasn't overthinking it. I felt it deep inside me. A void, a gnawing emptiness I couldn't escape. I didn't know what it was or how to fix it. So I did what I always did. I kept pushing it down, kept pretending everything was fine, but it wasn't fine. I wasn't fine. And then one evening, Emily sat me down. She had been praying for me. I knew that much. She had been hoping, maybe even pleading, for something like this to happen. But when she spoke, I saw the fear in her eyes. She could see something had changed in me. "Michael," she said softly, "I know you don't believe in God, but I've been praying for you, for your heart to open. I want you to come to church with me this Sunday. Just give it a chance, please. I don't know what you saw, but I know it's affecting you, and maybe God is trying to reach you." The words hit me like a hammer. I wanted to scream, to tell her I couldn't do it, but instead I stayed silent. I was confused, angry at myself for even considering it. Yet at the same time, something inside me yearned for answers. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was spinning, trapped in an endless loop of doubts and fears. Emily's words echoed in my head, her plea for me to come to church. I could feel the walls inside me cracking, and I didn't know how to stop it. The thought of setting foot in that church, of admitting to anyone, even Emily, that I was struggling with something I couldn't explain, felt impossible. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The life I had known, the life I thought I had control over, no longer made sense. I decided to go. Not because I believed, but because I needed answers. Something had happened to me, something that had shattered the foundation of everything I thought I knew. The church was old, humble, with wooden pews that creaked under the weight of years of worship. The air smelled like incense and old hymnals, and as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. The heaviness in the air, like the weight of 1,000 prayers. Emily squeezed my hand as we sat down, her eyes filled with hope. She'd been waiting for this day, praying for it. But as the pastor, Pastor John, stepped up to the pulpit, I felt an overwhelming sense of discomfort. His words, his calm, steady voice, seemed to echo in a space that felt foreign to me. "We're here today to talk about redemption," he said, "and the power of faith to save us from the darkness within." Darkness. That word seemed to hang in the air, almost like it had a life of its own. I shifted in my seat, uncomfortable. But then, something strange happened. The lights flickered. It was subtle at first, like a glitch in the system, but it felt significant. The air grew colder, and for just a moment, everything in the room seemed to stand still. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. I was alone in this strange moment. My heart began to pound. Was it just me? Was I imagining this? But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The devil. Not in the physical form I had seen during my near-death experience, but in a way that made the air itself feel thick with malice. His presence loomed in the corner of my vision, a dark shape that seemed to move with the flickering lights. And then the words came again, but this time they were louder, clearer. "You're not meant for this. You belong to me." I froze. My whole body went cold. I wanted to run, to leave, to get out of that place and away from the presence that had haunted me ever since that night in the garage. But I couldn't move. My legs were like stone, my body paralyzed by fear. Pastor John continued his sermon, completely unaware, but his words began to take on new meaning. It was as if they were directed at me, aimed directly at the turmoil in my soul. He spoke of sin, of redemption, of the need for salvation, and in that moment I understood. This wasn't just a coincidence. I wasn't here by accident. I was here because something had brought me, something far beyond my understanding. "You can't escape the truth," the voice of the devil hissed. "You can't run from your own darkness." But then Pastor John said something that cut through the noise, something that pierced me to my core. We are not defined by our past. Through faith, we can be reborn. The words hit me like a tidal wave. It was as though something in me snapped, like a part of my soul that had been locked away was suddenly unlocked. I wanted to run from the voice, from the darkness, but I felt something else, something that I couldn't ignore, a flicker of hope. I had been running my whole life from the very thing I needed most. The devil's whispers grew louder, but Pastor John's voice grew stronger. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't understand everything that had happened to me. But I knew one thing for certain. This was the beginning of my journey. The journey from disbelief to faith. The weeks after that day in church were a whirlwind. I had felt something stir inside me during Pastor John's sermon. But it wasn't as simple as just believing. The devil's presence still haunted me. Every night, I would wake up drenched in sweat, the words echoing in my mind, "You belong to me." I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was always lurking, just out of sight, waiting for me to falter. But despite the fear, something had shifted. The seeds of faith had been planted, and I couldn't deny it. I started attending church with Emily, though it felt awkward at first. I didn't know what to do with my hands during the prayers, or how to sing the hymns. But as I sat there, listening to the sermons, I began to understand that there was more to life than what I had seen before. It was as though my world was being expanded, piece by piece. Emily was overjoyed by the change in me, but I could see the worry in her eyes too. She knew that I wasn't fully convinced, that I was still battling with my doubts. She would often pray with me at night, her hands on my shoulders, her voice filled with warmth and belief. I could see the love she had for me, and the hope she held that I would one day find the same peace she had. But not everyone was so understanding. David, my father, was one of the first to notice. He hadn't exactly been the religious type, and seeing me start to question everything he had taught me growing up unsettled him. We had always been pragmatic, my father and I. We didn't need faith to survive. We just worked hard and kept our heads down. One night, over dinner, my father leaned across the table, his brow furrowed. "You've been going to church, huh?" he asked, his voice low, almost cautious. I nodded, unsure of where this conversation was going. "Yeah, I've been going. I'm trying to understand, trying to make sense of everything that's happened." He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. "Mike, you're wasting your time. There's no magic in those places. It's all just a crutch for people who can't handle the real world. I don't know what you saw or what you think happened, but you've got to snap out of it." His words hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't angry, he was disappointed. I could see that in his eyes. He had always believed in self-reliance, in the power of hard work, and he couldn't understand why I was suddenly reaching for something else. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to argue with him, to convince him that I wasn't just being naive, but another part of me understood. He was scared. He didn't want me to fall into something that could change the course of my life. He didn't know how to reconcile the son he had raised with the man I was becoming. But it wasn't just David. My friend Thomas, the one I worked with, had been one of the most vocal skeptics when it came to anything supernatural. He made fun of the idea of church, of faith, of anything that couldn't be explained by science. And when I told him that I had been going to church and trying to understand my experience, he laughed. "Come on, Mike," he said, shaking his head. "You're not one of those guys, are you? You're too smart for that. You've got to see this for what it is, just some bad dream. Don't let it mess with your head." I wanted to explain it to him, but I couldn't. I couldn't put into words what I was feeling, what I had seen, what I was starting to believe. The truth was, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But there was a part of me that couldn't ignore it. There was a tugging inside of me, a feeling that I couldn't escape, no matter how much I tried to suppress it. I was changing, and everyone around me was noticing it. Emily was hopeful, David was confused, and Thomas was mocking me. But I couldn't stop this journey. I couldn't stop what had already begun inside me. Every time I stepped into that church, it felt like I was walking into a battleground. My old beliefs fighting against the new truths I was trying to accept. And with every sermon, with every prayer, I felt like I was taking one step closer to something I couldn't yet fully grasp. The fear still lingered, and the devil's whispers still came at night, but now there was something else, something stronger fighting back, something that told me to keep going, to keep seeking the truth. As I continued my journey, I began to feel the weight of my choices pressing on me from all sides. The more I tried to embrace this new path of faith, the more I felt like I was walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and I might fall into the darkness I was so afraid of. But with every step, I began to understand that there were challenges ahead, challenges that I hadn't anticipated. At work, I found myself avoiding the conversations that used to come so easily. I had always been the guy who joked around with the guys at lunch, who traded stories and opinions without thinking twice. But now, when someone would make a joke about religion or question the purpose of life, I found myself getting angry. Angry at the ignorance, angry at the disrespect, and angry at myself for not knowing how to handle it. One afternoon, while sitting at lunch with Thomas and a few others from the office, the topic turned to religion. I could feel the old tension creeping in, but I tried to stay calm. I took a deep breath, hoping the conversation wouldn't escalate. "So, Mike," Thomas said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, "you've been to church a few times now, right? Tell me, what's it like being one of those people who believes in all that stuff? I mean, how can you buy into the whole salvation thing? Doesn't it just sound like a fairy tale?" The table fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. My heart started racing. I could feel my throat tighten. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, but I didn't know how. What could I say that wouldn't sound foolish? How could I explain what I had experienced? The dark presence, the words, the feeling of being pulled into something far greater than I could comprehend. I don't know, Thomas," I stammered, trying to find the right words. "It's hard to explain, but it's real to me. I felt something I can't ignore." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Something? What do you mean?" "You felt something. I thought you were the guy who always needed proof, facts, science." He laughed, and the others joined in, clearly amused by my discomfort. I could feel my face turning red. The pressure of being ridiculed, of being the butt of their jokes, was almost too much to bear. But what bothered me more than the laughter was the emptiness I felt inside. I had always been so sure of myself, so confident in my decisions, but now I felt lost, as though I had no solid ground to stand on. After that lunch, I began to question myself even more. Was I making a mistake? Was I just clinging to something because I was too afraid to face the truth? Maybe Thomas was right. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I had simply imagined everything. But then, the nightmares got worse. That night, as I tried to sleep, I was hit by the feeling again, the heavy, suffocating presence that had tormented me since that night in the garage. The whispers came, but this time they weren't just whispers. They were a chorus of voices, dark and relentless. "You're wasting your time," they hissed. "You're not one of them. You'll never fit in. You're meant for the darkness." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my body was frozen. And then I saw him again, the devil, standing in the shadows of my room, his eyes glowing with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "You cannot escape," he said, his voice low and chilling. "This is your fate. You belong to me." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. The darkness had returned, and it was more real than ever. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't afraid to face it. I got out of bed, my hands shaking as I reached for my Bible. Emily had given it to me, hoping it would help me find peace, and though I had opened it before, it had never felt real to me. But this time, as I flipped through the pages, I found a verse that struck me. "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." It was as if those words were written just for me. I wasn't just fighting myself. I wasn't just battling the remnants of my old life. I was fighting against something far darker, something that wanted to claim me and drag me back into the abyss. I felt the pull, the weight of it, but this time I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let the darkness win. I couldn't. I had seen the light, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. But as I stood there, holding the Bible in my hands, I realized something else. I wasn't alone in this fight. Emily had been praying for me. Pastor John had been praying for me. And even though I couldn't see it, I knew there were forces at work beyond my understanding. I had a choice. I could keep fighting, or I could give in. And I wasn't ready to give in. The days after my confrontation with the darkness were a blur. I still felt the weight of that battle, of the devil's words hanging over me, reminding me of my doubts and fears. But I held on. I clung to the Bible, to the idea that I was not alone in this, that there was something bigger than myself working in the shadows, guiding me. The more I prayed, the more I sought understanding, the clearer the path seemed to become, even though the road ahead was still uncertain. At home, things were quieter. Emily was more supportive than ever, but I could tell she was worried. She had always been my rock, but even she could see the toll this journey was taking on me. There were moments when I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the darkness still fresh in my mind. And when I would try to talk about it, she would just hold me and tell me everything would be okay. But I knew it wasn't okay. It couldn't be okay until I figured this out. One night after dinner, we sat together on the couch, the silence stretching between us. She looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "Mike, I can see how much this is hurting you. You're not just battling the darkness. You're battling yourself. You need to talk to someone who can really help. Pastor John, maybe, or even a counselor." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions that surged within me. I wanted to tell her everything, how the darkness felt so real, how the devil's presence still haunted me. But part of me was afraid that if I spoke too much about it, she would think I was crazy, that she would pull away from me. I didn't want to lose her. "I don't know, Em," I said, my voice low. "It's just hard. I don't know how to explain any of this. It's like I'm being torn in two. Part of me wants to believe, wants to accept that there's something more. But another part of me feels like I'm losing everything I ever knew. I don't know who I am anymore." She reached out, placing her hand gently on mine. "You're still you, Mike. You're just going through something that's bigger than all of us. I believe in you. I know you're stronger than this." Her words were a comfort, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing myself in this process. The more I searched for answers, the more I felt like I was falling further into the unknown. The conflict within me was tearing at the fabric of my being. The next day, I went to work, still feeling the weight of it all. As I sat at my desk, trying to focus, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation between Thomas and a few of the other guys in the office. They were talking about a new bar that had opened downtown, and I felt that old pull, the pull of the world I had left behind. A part of me wanted to join them, to pretend like everything was normal, to escape this internal war that seemed to have no end. But then I thought about what Emily had said. I thought about how far I had come, how much I had learned already. I had to make a choice. Either I continued to run from the truth, or I faced it head on. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not going," I said, my voice firm. The guys looked at me, confused. "What's up with you, Mike?" Thomas asked, his tone mocking. "Not gonna come have some fun? You've been all quiet lately." I could feel the pressure of their judgment, the weight of their expectations, but something inside me told me I couldn't go back to that life. Not now. Not when I was so close to finding the truth. "I'm just figuring some stuff out," I said, my voice quieter now. "I don't need to pretend anymore." I walked out of the office, the weight of the decision heavy on my chest. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of peace. I wasn't running from who I was becoming. I was walking towards something better, even if I couldn't fully understand it yet. The weeks following that decision felt like a balancing act. On the one hand, I was relieved to have made the choice to move forward, to stop pretending that everything was fine, and to fully face what I had been running from. On the other hand, the tension in my life had only grown stronger. It was as if the more I tried to walk towards the light, the more the darkness fought back. I started having vivid dreams again. They were different this time, less of the devil's haunting presence, and more otherworldly. In these dreams, I found myself standing in a vast, desolate place, an expanse of land that stretched for miles with no end in sight. The sky above me was a deep, almost suffocating shade of red, and the air was thick, as if I could barely breathe. As I walked through this barren landscape, I could hear whispers, soft at first, like a breeze moving through the trees, but as I walked further, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Mike, Mike." I turned to find nothing but emptiness. I would walk faster, trying to escape the feeling of being watched, of being pulled into the abyss, and then without fail, I would see him again. The figure, the devil. His silhouette would appear on the horizon, his eyes glowing with an unearthly fire, and his voice would call out to me. "You can't outrun me. You belong to me." I would wake up in a panic, my heart racing, my hands trembling, but each time, I found myself staring at the Bible on my nightstand. Emily had placed it there after the last time I had woken up in a cold sweat. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every time the devil appeared, it was followed by a feeling of deep sorrow and fear. But when I reached for the Bible, there was a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that I wasn't entirely alone in this. The more these dreams occurred, the more I felt as though I was being pulled in two directions, one toward the light and the other toward the darkness. It wasn't just a spiritual war anymore, it was a psychological battle, a war of the mind. The darkness that had once seemed so real, so tangible, was now fading in and out like a shadow that couldn't hold form. But the more I reached for the light, the more desperate the darkness seemed to become. One afternoon, as I sat at a coffee shop with Emily, I felt a sudden rush of anxiety. My heart skipped a beat as I caught sight of a man sitting alone at the table across from us. He was staring directly at me, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity I couldn't describe. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat, but there was something about his presence that made my blood run cold. I tried to ignore him, hoping he was just another person lost in their own thoughts. But his stare never wavered. It was as if he could see right through me. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, my palms growing sweaty. I turned back to Emily, trying to focus on her, but the man's gaze was unrelenting. Emily noticed the shift in my demeanor. "Mike, are you okay?" I shook my head, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. "I don't know. That guy, he's been staring at me for the past few minutes. It's like he knows me." Emily turned around, glancing at the man, but by the time she looked back at me, he was gone. I blinked, confused. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my grip on reality? The man had been so real, his gaze so intense, and yet now he was nowhere to be found. "I'm sure it's nothing," Emily said, squeezing my hand gently. "You're probably just tired. You've been through a lot lately." But I wasn't sure if it was nothing. Something about that encounter lingered in the pit of my stomach. It was as if the darkness had found a new way to reach me, through the physical world, through people I couldn't even explain. I wasn't just fighting a battle inside my head anymore. The line between what was real and what wasn't seemed to be blurring, and I couldn't tell where the dream ended and the waking world began. I couldn't tell if it was a warning or just my mind playing tricks on me, but I knew one thing for sure: the battle was escalating. I was no longer just struggling with doubts and fears. I was being actively pursued, and whatever it was that was chasing me, it wasn't going to stop until it had me. As the tension mounted, I began to feel more and more isolated. I couldn't talk to Emily about everything, not without sounding like I was losing touch with reality. I couldn't talk to Thomas or David, not when they were still mocking me, still trying to pull me back into the life I was trying to leave behind. I couldn't even talk to Pastor John, not with the doubts swirling in my mind, not when the very foundation of my faith was being shaken. I had to find answers, and I had to find them fast. The deeper I fell into this spiritual war, the more fragmented my life became. It wasn't just about fighting for my beliefs anymore. It was about trying to hold on to the relationships and the people I loved. Emily, Thomas, David, even Pastor John, they all seemed to be living in separate worlds now, while I felt like I was caught somewhere in between, unsure of where I belonged. Emily had been my anchor, and I knew she could sense the growing distance between us. I had tried to be open with her, tried to explain the chaos swirling inside me, but how could I tell her the truth? How could I explain that I was battling forces I didn't even fully understand? How could I put into words the fear I felt every time I saw that figure in my dreams, the one who called himself the devil? Despite my reservations, Emily didn't let go. She tried her best to keep me grounded, suggesting we take walks together or spend more time at church. But even that felt like a distraction, a temporary fix to something far deeper. Every time we prayed, every time I read the Bible, I felt peace, but it was fleeting. Like a wave that comes crashing onto the shore but never stays long enough to wash away the sand. The moments of clarity would pass, and then the darkness would return, more persistent, more demanding. One evening, after one of those unsettling dreams, I sat in the living room, staring at the pages of the Bible. The words blurred together as the tension in my chest tightened. I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I was missing something important. It wasn't enough to just pray or read scripture. There had to be more, something beyond the surface, something deeper I needed to uncover. I called Pastor John the next morning. We hadn't spoken in a while, and I needed someone to guide me. I had always trusted him, but even now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow drifting away from everything I had once believed. When I met him at the church, the warm familiarity of the old pews and stained glass windows did little to ease my anxiety. Pastor John was older now, his once dark hair showing streaks of gray, but his eyes still carried the same quiet wisdom. We sat in his office, and I couldn't help but feel like I was confessing my sins, even though I wasn't sure if I had any left. "What's been going on, Mike?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm, like a father who knew his son's heart better than he did himself. I took a deep breath, trying to put into words everything that had happened over the past few months. The near-death experience, the dreams, the feeling of being hunted by something that seemed both real and unreal at the same time. "I keep seeing him," I said quietly. "The devil. I don't know what he wants, but he won't leave me alone, and I feel like I'm being torn apart inside. There are times when I feel like I'm losing my grip on everything, like I'm being pulled in two directions. One part of me wants to hold on to my faith, but the other part is scared that I'm losing myself, that I'm going crazy." Pastor John was silent for a moment, and I could see his mind working, processing the weight of what I had just said. When he spoke again, his voice was steady but filled with concern. "Mike, what you're experiencing is real," he said. "But the thing you need to understand is that the devil doesn't play fair. He's not just trying to deceive you, he's trying to destroy you. But here's the truth. You've already been saved. The battle was fought and won on the cross. Everything you're going through right now is the enemy's last attempt to pull you away from the truth." His words cut through the confusion in my mind like a knife. I had heard them before, so many times in sermons and prayers. But hearing them now, in the midst of my struggle, they felt different. They didn't just seem like comforting words. They felt like the solid foundation I had been looking for. "I'm not sure how much longer I can fight," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I feel like I'm losing, like the darkness is getting closer." "You're not alone, Mike," Pastor John said, his eyes locking with mine. "The darkest battles often happen before the breakthrough. You're in a fight, but the victory is already yours. Don't forget that." His words should have brought me peace, and yet something inside me still felt uneasy. I had my faith, I had Pastor John's guidance, and I had Emily by my side, but I couldn't shake the sense that there was something more to this battle than I understood, something I hadn't yet uncovered. After the conversation with Pastor John, I started to wonder if the devil wasn't just targeting me alone. What if all the people I cared about were somehow connected to this battle? Emily, Thomas, David, even Pastor John. What if they were all unknowingly caught in the crossfire? And what if this journey wasn't just about me fighting for my own salvation, but about fighting for the people I loved? As these questions swirled in my mind, I realized I had a decision to make. I couldn't face this battle alone, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I needed to bring the people closest to me into the fold. They needed to know the truth, no matter how hard it was to say. The enemy wasn't just after me, it was after everything I held dear. The more I tried to make sense of the battle, the clearer it became that I was caught in the midst of something far bigger than I could have imagined. The devil, or whatever dark force it was that haunted me, wasn't just trying to torment me. He was trying to destroy everything I cared about, everything I had built my life around. It wasn't just about me anymore. I had to fight for Emily, for my friends, for my family, and most of all, for my faith. One evening, I called Thomas and David. I hadn't spoken to them about the deeper aspects of my struggles. I'd kept the darkness to myself, afraid that if I said too much, they'd think I was losing my mind. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just my battle, it was our battle. I had to pull them into the light, show them that what I was fighting wasn't some figment of my imagination, but a force that was real and dangerous. When we sat down that night, I didn't know where to start. I couldn't just say, "Hey, I'm being haunted by the devil." So, I decided to begin with my near-death experience. I told them about the moment I died, the sensation of my soul leaving my body, the encounter with the shadowy figure, the overwhelming sense of terror, and the revelation that I couldn't explain. I watched their faces as I spoke. Thomas, skeptical as ever, David, more serious than usual, and I wondered if they truly believed me. David was the first to speak. "Mike, I get it. You're going through something heavy, something real. But you've got to be careful. I mean, a lot of this could be your mind processing trauma. We've all been through a lot." Thomas nodded. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, but what exactly are we supposed to do about it? You're asking us to fight something we can't see, Mike. You need to be sure about this before dragging anyone else into it." Their responses hit me hard. I had expected them to be more supportive, but instead, it felt like I was being dismissed, as if the weight of my experience wasn't enough to validate the terror I was feeling. I tried to stay calm, to find the right words, but all I could think of was the terror I felt every night when I closed my eyes. I could still feel the devil's presence, like he was right behind me, whispering my name. "David, Thomas, this isn't just in my head," I said, my voice shaking. "I've seen him. I've felt him. I can't explain it, but he's real. I've been to hell and back. I need your help, because if I don't get through this, I might lose everything, and I can't do it alone." There was silence for a long time. I could see the doubt in Thomas's eyes, but then something shifted. His skepticism seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding. He leaned forward, locking eyes with me. "All right, Mike. I don't fully understand what you're going through, but I'll stand by you," Thomas said slowly. "We'll figure this out together, but you need to be prepared for what's coming. There's something bigger at play here, and it's not just about your faith. It's about all of us." David was quiet for a moment before nodding in agreement. "I can't promise I'll understand everything, but if this is real, if this is something that's happening to you, then we're with you. You don't have to face this alone." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was like the fog that had been clouding my mind was beginning to lift, and I realized something important. I had people who cared about me, people who were willing to fight by my side. Maybe they didn't fully understand what I was going through, but they were willing to walk with me through the darkness, even if they couldn't see the threat as clearly as I could. But just as I began to feel a sense of relief, a strange feeling washed over me. It was the same sense I'd gotten when I saw the man in the coffee shop, the man who had been watching me. The air around us seemed to shift, growing colder, denser, as if the very room had been infused with a sense of danger. My heart began to race again, and I could feel the presence of something dark, something that wasn't just in my head. It was real. I turned to Thomas and David, but their faces had gone pale. They had felt it too. The room seemed to close in on us, the walls pressing down as if the very space itself was being consumed by the darkness. Suddenly, the door to the apartment slammed open, and in stepped a figure, a shadowy silhouette, taller than any man should be. His eyes glowed like embers in the dark, his face hidden by a hood that seemed to draw all the light into itself. The temperature in the room dropped, and I could hear the faint sound of whispers, just like in my dreams. It was him. The devil. He spoke, his voice low and menacing. "You think you can escape me? You think your little faith will save you? You belong to me, Mike." Before I could react, he was gone, vanished as quickly as he had appeared. The air grew warm again, and the weight on my chest lifted. But the fear remained. "This is real," I whispered. "He's not just in my head, he's here." Thomas and David stared at me, their expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. They hadn't seen him, but they had felt him. And they knew, in that moment, that this battle wasn't just mine anymore. It was all of ours. The encounter with the devil was like a hammer striking glass, shattering any remaining doubts I had. There was no more room for ambiguity. I couldn't deny what had happened, what I had seen, what I had felt. The devil was real, and he was coming for me, for us. That night, as the weight of what had occurred settled in, I found myself unable to sleep. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the suffocating presence of something malevolent hovering just beyond my reach. I could still hear the echo of his words, "You belong to me." The fear that gripped me wasn't just about my own safety anymore. It was about everything and everyone I loved. I had dragged Thomas and David into this, and Emily, Emily, who had been the one constant in my life, now seemed just as vulnerable. How could I protect her when I couldn't even protect myself? The next day, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront this head on. I needed to do something, anything, that would give me the strength to fight back. Sitting in front of my Bible, I ran my fingers over the pages. I had read them all, countless times, but now they felt like words on a page, hollow and distant. I needed a sign. I needed something more than faith, something tangible, something real. I needed the power to face this darkness. That's when I remembered something Pastor John had told me earlier. The darkest battles often happen before the breakthrough. What if this was the breakthrough? What if I was being tested? But I couldn't do it alone. I had already seen the depths of my weakness. I had to face this battle with my friends, my family, my community. There was no room for half-hearted efforts. No more hiding. I grabbed my phone and called Emily. I could hear the concern in her voice when she answered. "Mike, you okay? You haven't been yourself lately. What's going on?" "I need you to come to the church," I said, my voice steady but with an edge of urgency. "I'm going to do something important." "Mike, what's happening? You're scaring me." "I'll explain when you get here. Just please, Emily, trust me." I hung up, feeling a sense of finality. This wasn't going to be easy. I knew I had to confront Emily about everything, about the darkness I'd been battling, the devil's attempts to claim me, and the vision I'd had of hell. I couldn't keep her in the dark any longer. When she arrived at the church, her face was filled with worry, but there was a trust in her eyes that made me feel both guilty and relieved. She loved me, but how could she possibly understand the depths of what I was facing? How could I ask her to stand by me when she was just as unprepared as I had been? "Mike," she said softly, her voice trembling as she stepped inside. "I don't know what's going on, but I can see you're not the same. Tell me what's happening. I can't bear to see you like this." I looked at her, and in that moment, everything I had been holding in finally spilled out. I told her everything. About the near-death experience, the figure in my dreams, the encounter with the devil. I spoke with raw honesty, afraid but knowing that I had to expose the darkness in my life if I wanted any chance of breaking free from it. "Emily, I'm scared. I've seen the devil. I've felt him, and I can't keep pretending that everything is okay. I need you to help me fight this." There was a long silence before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mike, I don't understand everything, but I know one thing. I love you, and I'm not going to leave you. You're not alone in this. We'll fight it together." Her words hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. In that moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, if only just a little. I realized I wasn't alone, not in this fight, not in my struggle. Emily, Thomas, David, they were all here. We were in this together. But as I looked into Emily's eyes, something else stirred within me, something deeper, a knowing. The devil hadn't just come for me, he had come for everything I cared about. If I was going to face him, I had to make the hardest choice of my life, to confront the darkness head on, no matter the cost, or to run from it and risk losing everything. There was no more running. The time had come to make my stand. The decision was made. I couldn't run from it any longer. But even as the words left my mouth, as I made the vow to Emily that I would fight, a sense of dread washed over me. The devil wasn't just a force I could confront with sheer willpower. This wasn't a battle I could win with logic or strength alone. I needed something deeper, something transcendent. I needed the power of faith and the strength of those who truly believed. That night, Emily, Thomas, and David gathered in the church with me. The walls of the old building seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though the air itself was charged with anticipation. My palms were sweaty, my heart pounding in my chest. But beneath the fear, there was also a deep sense of purpose. I knew this was the moment that would either break me or set me free. "Are we ready for this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My gaze shifted between Emily, Thomas, and David. Each of them had their own doubts, their own fears, but they had chosen to stand with me. That meant everything. Thomas nodded, his face a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "We're here, Mike. We're in this together." David, who had been more reserved throughout this ordeal, looked up from his hands. "We've got your back, man. Whatever happens, we'll face it head on." Emily stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. I'm not going anywhere. We'll do this together. I felt a surge of gratitude, but it was quickly swallowed by the weight of what we were about to face. The air in the church seemed to grow colder, the stillness pressing in on us. I could feel it. The devil was close, watching, waiting. He was always just out of reach, lingering in the shadows, ready to strike. Suddenly, a whisper broke the silence, an almost imperceptible sound that slithered into my mind. It was familiar. The voice I'd heard so many times in my nightmares. You think you can escape me? The voice echoed through the church, as if it was coming from every corner. You are mine. All of you are mine. I gripped the Bible in my hands, my knuckles white, my breath coming faster. The fear, the terror, I felt it all over again. But this time there was something different. I wasn't alone. I could feel the presence of my friends beside me, their unwavering faith anchoring me. I wasn't facing this on my own. I couldn't let the darkness win. This is where it ends, I said aloud, my voice steady, more confident than I felt. I am not yours. I belong to God. As I said the words, the temperature in the room dropped even further, and the church doors slammed open with a force that sent a cold gust of wind swirling through the building. I could feel it, the pressure of the devil's presence filling the space, his malice and hatred pulsing through the air like a tangible force. But something else was rising within me too. It was the power of belief, of the strength of my convictions. I wasn't the same person who had first faced this evil in the hospital bed. I had changed, I had fought, and I had survived. Now I was ready to confront him head on. Suddenly a figure appeared in front of me, tall, dark, and looming. His eyes glowed with an unholy fire, his form shifting like smoke in the shadows. The devil. I knew it, even before he spoke. You cannot win, Mike, he growled, his voice sending a chill through my spine. You think you've escaped me? You're nothing. You belong to me. All that you love, all that you believe in, is mine to take. But as I stood there staring at the figure before me, I realized something. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't all-powerful. He was a liar, a deceiver. And in that moment, the truth hit me like a lightning bolt. I don't belong to you, I said, my voice growing stronger. I belong to God, and no matter what you do, you cannot take that from me. For a moment, there was a silence. The devil seemed to recoil, as if the words I spoke had cut through the darkness. Then, with a guttural growl, he lunged toward me, but something stopped him. A brilliant light flooded the room, illuminating everything, pushing back the shadows. It was as if the very presence of God had entered the church, filling the space with overwhelming power. The devil shrieked, a sound that pierced the air like 1,000 screams. He tried to move, but the light held him in place, immobilizing him, reducing him to nothing but a trembling, shrieking figure in the center of the room. I am the light, I said, my voice unwavering, and you cannot exist here. The light intensified, filling the church until there was no darkness left. The devil's figure dissolved, disintegrating into the air, his presence banished, his hold broken. The light faded, leaving a profound silence in its wake. I stood there, panting, overwhelmed by what had just happened. It was over, the battle was won, but I didn't feel victorious in the way I thought I would. Instead, I felt at peace, a deep, abiding peace that I hadn't known in so long. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was free. The devil was gone. I was free. As I stood there in the church, surrounded by the warmth of the fading light, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had just happened. The presence of the devil, gone. The terror, the doubt, the pain, vanished. I was free. But that freedom wasn't just about the devil being banished from my life. It was about something deeper, something much more profound. I had been reborn. Not in the way I had imagined, not in the way I had expected, but in a way that was true to my soul. It was as if I had been shaken to my very core, stripped bare of everything that wasn't real. And in that moment of silence, I understood what it meant to truly live. I looked over at Emily, Thomas, and David. They were standing there watching me, their faces filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. They had seen it too, the light, the battle, the victory. But I knew this wasn't just my victory, it was theirs too. They had stood with me, and in doing so, they had helped me find the strength I needed to face what had seemed impossible. Emily stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. Mike, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like a weight has been lifted. It's like the world has changed somehow. I feel it too, Thomas said, his voice a little shaky. Like something broke and it's finally over. David smiled softly, a quiet understanding in his gaze. I think we've all been changed tonight. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for each of them. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone in my struggles. I had friends, family, people who cared, who believed, and together we had faced the darkness and won. But more than anything, I knew I had found something far greater than I had ever known before. I had found peace, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose. The battle with the devil wasn't the end of my story, it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, everything changed. The world outside the church didn't look the same as it had before. The colors seemed brighter, the air cleaner. People I had once seen through the lens of fear and judgment were now faces filled with stories, with potential, with love. I saw life differently, through the eyes of someone who had been to the edge of death and returned with a new understanding of what truly matters. I made a vow that day, a vow to live differently, to be the person I had always wanted to be, to love fully, to believe deeply, and to face every challenge with the courage that had been born out of my spiritual awakening. As for my relationship with Emily, Thomas, and David, it had shifted too. We were no longer just friends. We were spiritual companions, brothers and sisters in this journey we call life. We had faced the darkness together, and that bond was something that could never be broken. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and not every day would be filled with light. But now I had the tools to face it. I had the strength that came from faith, from love, and from knowing that no matter how dark things got, there would always be a way out, there would always be hope. The devil had tried to claim me, to drag me into the depths of hell, but in the end, he had failed. Because what he didn't understand, what he could never take away, was the truth that had been revealed to me. That love, light, and faith are more powerful than any darkness. And with that truth, I walked out of that church, a changed man, ready to face whatever came next. I had seen the devil in hell, and I had overcome him. And now, I was ready to help others do the same. If you've been inspired by Mike's journey, we invite you to reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever faced darkness in your life, only to emerge stronger on the other side? Share your story in the comments below, and let's support each other on this journey of life and faith. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with others who may need a reminder that they too can overcome. We'll be back soon with more stories of strength, transformation, and hope.